Okay, well, good morning and thank you for joining me here today alongside some brilliant panel guests. My name is Gina Clark and I'm the Editor-in-Chief at the FinTech Times. Today, we're going to be looking at the topic of sovereign cloud, a European perspective, and my guests will help me and hopefully help you also to decipher the challenges and opportunities that the conversation around cloud sovereignty provides. If you'd like to contribute to the conversation, you can submit your questions in the Q&A box. The chat function has been turned off. In a moment, we're going to look at some of the discussion points to clear up any tech jargon and what we actually mean by the words digital sovereignty. But first, I'd like to introduce you to my panel. Joe Bagley is the Chief Technical Officer for EMEA at VMware and assists organizations in understanding how to use today's advances in technology to deliver real business impact and plan for disruptive technologies of the future. As a cloud agnostic platform, VMware supports customers to navigate the challenges around cloud sovereignty. Francesco Bonfiglio is the Chief Executive Officer of the digital ecosystem GAIAX. The European initiative works to create an environment in which data can be shared and stored under the control of data owners and users, so that services can be offered in an interoperable, secure and transparent way. Previously an IT executive for over 30 years, Francesco joined GAIAX in March early this year. Pauline Flamont is the Chief Technology Officer at Michelin and has worked with the company for over 20 years in both France and the United States. Her specialties in that time have included the development of business systems alongside IT risk management. And Sylvain Rory is the Chief Sales Officer at leading European cloud provider OVH Cloud, where Sylvain is responsible for driving and implementing a global sales strategy. He ensures that OVH's solutions and tools put technology at the heart of the business to revolutionize how they deliver services to customers. OVH currently delivers public and private cloud products across 140 countries worldwide. Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to join me. Oh, there you all are. And now that's the panel introduced, I'd like to introduce the topic and answer the question, why are we having this discussion today? I think most of us are familiar with the acceleration of the digital landscape, in no small part due to the effects of the pandemic, which has confined us to our homes and increased our reliance on the use of digital data. This exponential demand has seen predictions that the cloud market will grow more than tenfold up to 2030, according to the IDC, with European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen declaring it our digital decade. But this exponential demand is now matched for a growing need of digital sovereignty and capability across nations. With 92% of the Western world's data now stored in the United States, plus additional security threats from other regions and competition from global tech players, it has become critical for Europe to act independently in the digital world. There is now certainly belief that there should be regional, if not national, mandate to improve data security, privacy, and innovation. Today, alongside our panel of experts in cloud technology, we're going to discuss how this can become a reality and the challenges for businesses if it doesn't happen. But first, I thought it would be good to get some clarification on some of these topics in a bit of a quick fire round. We'll be able to explore them more during the discussion. So Joe, I would like to start with you and ask the question, what do we mean by digital sovereignty?
Yeah, no worries. And thanks very much for everyone joining us this morning. Yeah, digital sovereignty in the context of what we're talking about today is really about people maintaining control over their data, I think is the best way to think about it. So when you think about it from an individual perspective, a citizen, they're worried from a digital sovereignty perspective that the data that is theirs or data about them has the right procedures and controls in place so that it can't be potentially, accessed or misused by nefarious actors. And when we talk about that in the context of large companies, there's actually a reference now, and our CEO has been using the term enterprise sovereignty in a similar sort of context, where understanding that people have control over their data and the data associated with their enterprise. Now, this was all quite simple 20 years ago because all our data sat on our own computers and was essentially in our own data centers from an enterprise perspective. As we now enter into what is truly a multi-cloud world, and data that our organizations handle and use is rightly spread all over the place, I think is the best way to put it. There's now obvious concerns about the fact of where is this data? And there always has been. Who owns this data? Who has access to this data? Who can potentially manipulate and or change this data, and so on and so on and so forth. And so that's really the drive behind the current talk around sovereignty. And it comes from a general concern across citizens, but also now a concern across enterprises. And of course, there's various regulations and regulators and specifically in banking, but also in other controlled and regulated industries that are looking very carefully at this and have done for a while. So ask a citizen in the street, they'll talk about GDPR, but people in business know it goes way, way further than that when you think about the sovereignty of your data and control and access to the data that's important to you. So yeah, that's my take on what digital sovereignty is.
That's a great summary, thank you. And over to Sylvain, just exploring that a little further and asking, what do we mean by cloud sovereignty?
Well, as everybody knows, cloud is really the engine that is like fueling the tech and the digitalizations of the world. So it's extremely important as more and more companies, more and more software, more and more applications are relying on this cloud to produce services to citizens, companies, individuals, users, that actually this cloud is agnostic to such an extent that indeed we can guarantee the full control of the data. I agree with Joe on that front, and delivers full transparency. I always like to make this metaphor about what happens in some countries and in the region of the world about food. People at some point, they need to know exactly what's in their plate. We move from, massive fooding after the Second World War, where it was very important to feed the populations. So we value quantity versus quality. But slowly but surely, we move towards more quality, and people want to understand this. What is it that I have in my plate? They want full transparency, so they understand exactly what they are to go for. And that's exactly the same movement that is happening with the tech nowadays. We need this transparency so we control the tech and we dominate at some point this tech. We use it for the best, and this tech is not using us. So that is what it's about. And cloud is a massive piece of this promise, because this is what is fueling everything that we are consuming nowadays in the tech world.
I love your food analogy. That always makes me look forward to lunch, but I thought it was very well done. And now, Francesco, can you please explain to us what is the role of GAIAX in digital sovereignty and in cloud sovereignty?
Hi, Gina, everybody. Thank you for the question. Yes, I think that picking up on what Sylvain just said, we need to get back control on digital technologies. And the role of GAIAX is actually to build a sort of operating system that allows for the control and governance of existing technologies, and particularly on cloud stacks that nowadays we have no sufficient transparency, no sufficient control over, and no sufficient interoperability. So GAIAX is building this software layer that allows to create this kind of oversight and allows to connect to any existing technology and an existing cloud stack, providing the level of transparency, meaning inspectability of the services, readability of the service characteristics, sovereignty, meaning control and decision, self-determined decisions, or if you want, we are building a framework to allow for educated decisions on how and what you want to use, and interoperability, which cannot occur in a world that is possibly still dominated by proprietary technologies and where interoperability has not been a business driver. So the world of the future will see portability and interoperability a business driver, as a necessary business driver, because the world is changing into a world of distributed data, where data need to be moved freely one side or another, and processes need to be brought to the data. And in this world of several directions and roundabouts instead of one-way routes, we need to have a different level of control on the underlying motorways that bring our data across the different companies, the different nations, and of course, the different individuals. So GAIAX has been born as a project to build this level of digital sovereignty and provide an answer to all those, let me say, players in the market European and non-European, that are waiting for this type of new sovereign area, and that are waiting for a new generation of cloud that is federated across multiple points and not hyper-concentrated in a fewer points, and in a way that is inclusive and open to any technology. So not exclusive of any European or non-European technology, but open to anybody. So anybody will be able to become GAIAX compliant as long as they decide to open their technology, their services to be inspectable, verifiable, and made, let me say, transparent and controllable by the users.
Excellent. Well, that's a lovely summary, and I look forward to chatting more to you about that in the panel. And over to Pauline. I'd like to ask, why are these issues so important for companies such as Michelin?
Hey, I fully agree with the other panelists. Today is very critical that we know where the data are, and we need to ensure that they are properly protected. Why? Because a company like Michelin, we need to make sure that our innovation is properly protected. We need to make sure that innovation is not accessed by people who are not entitled to. We also need to make sure that our commercial data are properly protected, and we also care for our reputation. So we don't want that personal data, either for the employees or for the customers, is not properly protected and is accessed and spread everywhere. So it's really by respect to our employees and respect to the customers that we need to make sure that all those data are protected accordingly to the regulations or to our rules. And so that's why we rely on the ecosystem to help us as well when we have to share with other partners.
Excellent. And the focus of the session is a European perspective. But I thought maybe we could just throw it open to all of you and ask whether data sovereignty is just about Europe, or is it about any country that needs to look after the interests of corporate, national, business and consumer data? Anybody want to start that one off?
Yeah, if I may just, Gina, it's a very good question, actually. We've been experiencing in Latin America, in APAC, but also in the US and in Canada, also some strong will about users to embrace this concept of getting back in control. So the word sovereignty is not necessarily, or doesn't have the same flavor, not the same definitions wherever you see it in the world, and even within Europe, that I can guarantee you, and I'm sure Francesco can elaborate on that. But the concept of getting in control, the concept of understanding what's going on, the concept of being in control with the tech is extremely important. Actually, it's interesting also to look at the, even in the US, you have this this movement nowadays about what we call repatriation. That is to say, like, in order to avoid this kind of situations where I'm not in control, where I'm moving away from the cloud and I'm coming back to my on-prem things, because this is the only way for me to get back in control, which is kind of an extreme movement, right? But that has happened, and I think Dropbox is a pretty good example of that. So definitely, I think this movement goes way beyond just the border of Europe. Europe being, I would say, the area right now where the regulation is not as strong as in other places around the world when it comes to data.
Yeah, I can add on top of what Sylvain just said, that this is totally true, and the proof of the pudding is that GAIAX has got 300 members, 90% are European, but not only. So we have members from the US, from China, from Korea, from Japan. And I can tell you that the push, for example, for countries like Korea and Japan is extremely high, because they want to build exactly the same layer of governance and trust. The very reason is that we are not talking about a European problem, and we are not talking about a debate or dispute between Europe and US. We are talking about the future of the economy for the overall worldwide economy, and not just one country, because the future of economy is going to be driven mainly by data, and concentrating these data in a way that cannot be controlled, leveraged, or you don't have control on how those data can be exploited by others, will simply constitute a move of the economy value to other places that are not under control. So it's a very specific need of everybody. And when you say GAIAX has been built by European, for Europe and beyond, this is the sentence I keep repeating myself. because this is the truth.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think for us, it's very much a global problem, or a global system, a global thing, shall I say. What we're, with the Sovereign Cloud Initiative that we're announcing this week, it's a global thing for us. It's not just a European thing. However, it's interesting to say that it is European-led in some ways, because though other countries would be looking at cloud sovereignty from an individual country perspective, i.e. how do they make things stay within their country, something like GAIAX is very special, because in a collaborative environment that crosses many national borders, such as the European Commission and the European Community, it's only out of that something like GAIAX can emerge, where GAIAX is looking for a mechanism for secure, trusted data interchange between nation states and between organizations within a framework. And that's why I think the rest of the world is looking at that, because that environment is very unique in Europe, I think, to want to drive that as something that's going to be global. But the fact that GAIAX is driving around a series of standards and open source coding in that space is what's of great interest to the international partners there. And what Francesco's leading is huge in that way. But yes, it's definitely not just a European thing. It's a global thing where people are looking to, I suppose, retain and maintain control over their data.
I think on that note, it might be time for us to dig a little deeper and maybe look at some specific questions. Okay, so first back to you, Joe, and then maybe on to Pauline. But who actually wants and needs sovereignty over their data? And maybe do you want to share some examples of the value that this brings to businesses?
Yeah, I think it should be hopefully fairly obvious to most people why people would want sovereignty over their data, but it's driven by various different factors. A first major factor, obviously, is at a government level. You're seeing a lot of government and nation state activity where they want, for example, citizen health data, citizen tax data, citizen data full stop, to stay within their national boundaries for various reasons, which should be blatantly obvious to most people. And so, whereas there's been this rush to, I suppose the best way to look at it is a rush to global hyperscalers, which tend to be American, though there are others as well. There's now this concern rising across that, hang on a second, all of the data that we're building, though it's fantastic to go and use these clouds, is sitting within another nation's purview or another nation's control potentially, and if whatever happened in the future. So there's this generic concern in that context from a national security perspective. And so we're seeing a primary drive for sovereign clouds and data sovereignty driven at a nation state around that kind of level of things. And then it starts to happen with companies. Now the interesting thing is most organizations want to be global. So if I'm a French company, I want to be a global company. So maybe I don't want to make sure all my data stays within France, but it's that delicate balance between the regulations that I've got to operate under in the different countries I operate with, around the data that's associated with the people I'm dealing with and the entities I'm dealing with, and how I then balance that with being a global organization. So it's not as simple as someone just has to provide a cloud that's French for French people to use. What it is essentially I'm looking at global organizations that are now saying, okay, I have to interchange data with multiple entities. I have to store data in multiple places around the world. If I'm dealing in country X, I've got to store data in that country, but where does the sovereignty of that data contend with the sovereignty of data of my home country and all these other bits and pieces in between? Finance is even more complex, and it's a world that I know, Gina, well. It's even more complex, where we're dealing with banks now that have challenges around various things. One, when I talk to a bank, the first thing they tell me about is concentration risk. They're concerned now that they've maybe not putting all of their data and all of their assets in one cloud. So the regulators are saying, okay, control that. Then the regulators are saying, so spread your risk across multiple clouds, but make sure you can get out of any of those clouds at any time, and make sure you know at all times where your data is and who's in control of it. Those are some real technical challenges that aren't just solved overnight by some salesperson from the cloud vendor saying, oh, it's easy, you do this. And that's why the world isn't made of 3 or 4 hyperscalers. The world is made of over 4,500 cloud providers who provide unique services for this blended mix of a multi-cloud world that we live in, not just everything's going into one cloud. So who wants and needs sovereignty over this data? Everyone, to some extent, wants to understand where and what they're doing and how. So, it's not just a simple answer, I'm afraid.
And I guess, Pauline, you must have some concerns as a business. What are you thinking going ahead?
As Joe said, it's not an easy answer. So yes, everybody needs a sovereignty. If I look at my company, we sell tires and services in 180 countries. So it means that some data have to be accessed from those places. And the business relies on us, ISAT, to make sure that one, the data is accessible, and two, it's secured. And of course, we cannot know every single regulation. So working with SaaS providers or cloud providers, it helps me as the CTO to help, to make sure that they help me to set the right framework. And I rely on them to provide the right security. So that's the first answer. The second one is on the who needs sovereignty. I would say everybody within my company. Of course, the research and development, they want to make sure that innovation is safely protected and accessible only by legitimate people. HR, they need to make sure that the employee data is safe and well protected per country. Same for the sales. And I, as an ISAT person, I need the sovereignty to make sure that the data are protected according to each and every single framework per country. So I would say everybody.
Thanks. And that nicely brings us, I guess, Sylvain, into the conversation. And I would ask, what is the role of the cloud in delivering data sovereignty, and what part do cloud service providers play in this?
It's huge. As I said, I think it's really what is really the underneath layer that is fueling the entire applications of software that you are using on daily basis. And the cloud provider is and the metaphor of Francesco about the highway to make everything accessible for users. This cloud provider must demonstrate the ability of making this cloud, which is, the word is interesting because cloud, smoke, transparent, right? So it has, we want blue skies, no more cloud, no more smoke. We need transparency at every layer so we can commit on making sure that people will have the information about where is the data, who is in charge of it, what's going on with my data, is my data transiting from different country, which will then apply different regulation, and what kind of external regulation can apply to my data despite where I'm operating from. So this level of transparency needs to display within the cloud provider in order to guarantee, obviously, the sovereignty. And then it's really up to the customer, the user, to decide. Because again, we have some data that don't need this kind of level of sovereignty, and it's okay to have this data maybe used to train other algorithm than the one I'm interested in. But this level of transparency needs to really display. So that's what the cloud provider needs to come up with in order to be able to provide this kind of sovereignty. And then there are things that cloud provider control or not control. If you are obviously nowadays a provider that become a cloud provider from the United States of America, you have some regulations that are beyond your reach that apply to the market and consequently to your customer. And this is the world we are in at some point. The tech wanted to make this flat world, everything is possible and almost no border, but we can see that nowadays few regulations are also impacting the way data, the way tech can be consumed or can be used at some point. This is what it is, but the full transparency needs to be displayed, needs to be communicated. So again, the user, the customer is in control and able to make the right choice in order to go forward with digital transformations or cloud transformation.
And we mentioned hyperscalers briefly earlier as well. Is this just providing an alternative to hyperscalers, or does it work in conjunction?
I think it works in conjunction. I think hyperscalers are coming with an angle where actually they were some of them pioneers of these cloud consumptions, and they are extremely important to the accelerations of the digitalizations of the world. It's just that we kind of focus in a way on the user experience. We focus on how easy and simple to use new applications, new things that makes our lives easier and so on. And now, I mean, hyperscalers together with a cloud provider like OVH Cloud, but others as well, in order to step back and reflect on the various layers that are necessary. And I think hyperscalers are also in the process of doing so. They made some announcement recently about their will also to be more transparent, because they acknowledge the fact that it's no longer possible for them to continue to just push also services that are just used and consumed without full knowledge of users about what's really going on with their data. At some point, I think it's interesting to see that, and it was mentioned by Joe and a few others, I think the reputational challenge for companies about the way they consume tech is going to become also very important. I think to the same level of other big values, such as the sustainability, such as the gender equality, the way you consume data, the way you offer users and consumers to use data or not, is going to be also a very important value moving forward.
Joe and Francesco, you're nodding your heads. Do either of you want to jump in there?
Yeah, well, a lot of good words and good thoughts in the same direction. Well, there's a lot to say, but what can I add on top of it? I think that first of all, let me explain where we are and where we stand, because otherwise it's difficult to picture the problem. One big statement that someone may go mad with is that we need to remember that when the cloud was born, and even the word cloud was there because people did not have a big knowledge or awareness of the value of data. In other words, the main concern is, let's get rid of this stuff. Let get someone else manage it. The cloud was preached to be a cost reduction as a main driver. The reality showed the opposite. Everybody knows that if you use the same workload and you don't really exploit the scale up, scale out, pay-per-use and variability of workloads, actually cloud is more expensive than any on-premise dedicated infrastructure. But the real truth is that cloud, possibly, if we should redefine cloud today, we wouldn't name it cloud, we would name it kind of roots, because from up in the air, we now need to know where data are and how they circulate across the ecosystem of the ground. It's like connecting several trees in a forest that is becoming huge and covering all the planet. This is what cloud has to become. And that's why we are moving from an hyperscaler model, which resembled very much the old mainframe model. Actually, the cloud was a translation into the up in the air model of the mainframe, into something that is much more driven by the edge, far edge. And it's, believe it or not, much closer to what used to be at the beginning. So joining the dots, connecting several computers, connecting several nodes that are becoming smaller and smaller. And this is one point. The other point I wanted to make is that the strategic move to the future is about data ethics. And I think, yes, Sven touched a very important point. What does data ethics mean? It means that the world we're living in, the world that controls our lives, society, the way we work, the way we send our children to school, the world that basically surround us is becoming digital. That means the concept of the digital twin is much more expanded than what we believe. And we are already living inside a digital twin of our city, of our office, of our family, of our anything. So we cannot live in a world where our twin does not follow the same rules, laws, and ethical principles. And this is one aspect of the ethics. The other aspect is that data is a propriety, is a property. And now, from a legal perspective, this is not exactly the case. And again, it's a mind shift. But many nations and many legislators are thinking about to translate the concept of property to data as well as any other good, because if it is a property, the usage of data must produce a value to the data owner, to the property owner, because it is illegal to give out for free something. If you give out your house for something, somebody from the tax agency will come to you to ask the why. But nowadays we are giving out for free our houses, our people, our lives, because there is not a strong regulation. The future will be that possibly instead of privacy regulation, we will talk about private regulation. In other words, I want to be free to use my data to give it out, provided I know who is using it for doing what, and provided I get something back. So this is the future. But now, again, going back to our days, another important thing to remember is we are talking about digital economy, cloud, sovereignty, etc. The main problem, the first problem we need to solve is that we are stuck around a very low penetration of cloud in Europe. We are talking about removing the SaaS and the PaaS, possibly 20%, which means 80% of our data and applications are not in the cloud. We cannot talk about any future without removing this roadblock. And this is what GAIAX is trying to do. And of course, you have to remove the roadblock, providing free movement of data across different players, free circulation and interoperability across them, sovereignty, so visibility and control, and a trusted platform. But without doing that, people will not move to the cloud.
I think with segue into the next question quite nicely, actually, because I'm really interested in the community response of, to GAIAX and what you're trying to do. What's been that response from the industry?
It was incredible. Like I said, we are now 320. I mean, they keep growing every week, members. And the good news is that we have users of technology, providers of technology, startups, small, medium enterprise, which is 85% of the economic fabric in Europe and not just in Italy, just to give an example. And why is that? Because people for the first time are sitting around the same table and say, this is what we want to do with data. And this is how we can help you doing it. And we are preparing these recipes, these projects, and submitting them into several tables, helping governments identifying way to spend, for example, the next generation EU money, which is a unique opportunity. So if you think about that, Europe invested 750 billion euro. 20% minimum has to go to digital, so 150 billions. But actually, if you think about all the other sectors, there is no single sector that is not going through a digital transformation. So maybe, I'm not saying 50%, 30% minimum of this money will go directly or indirectly to digital initiatives. For the first time, we are putting together people that can raise their voice and say, this is what we need, this is what we miss, and this is what we want to do. And we are doing this in conjunction from a private association, because we are totally private. We are not subsidized. We're not granted by any public organization. But we are saying, this is what the market wants. This is what the market would like to do. These are the players of the market that would like to do it together. And we can help, for the first time, a Europe that is leading in innovation, because we are doing something that is not out there. We are providing an opportunity for the leveling of the playing field. We're doing something that is inclusive. We're not building protectionist walls, and we have money to spend. So if you put all these things together, the equation is perfect.
And speaking of digital transformation, Joe, you've got some exciting news later on. What's VMware trying to achieve with your new sovereign cloud initiative?
Well, listening to all of this is fantastic, and it's really good to hear people lining up. This has not jumped out on us, okay? Back in 2006, Clive Humby came up with the quote, oil is, data is the new oil, if you know what I mean. But when he was talking about data is the new oil, he was talking there about data must be broken down and analyzed for it to have value. I don't think what the underlying message was, hang on a second, you're putting all your future strength, all your future, I suppose, power, worth, sort of unknowingly into these clouds. And at some point, you're going to have to pull it back out again, sort it out and work out where it is. And I think, as Francesco said, there's still a reticence in Europe, only 20% people in public clouds. And that's because a lot of people have been scared about where they're putting their data and why they're putting their data there, and how they could get that data back out, et cetera, et cetera. And there's been various horror stories about being, locked in because they've coded themselves into something or whatever. So there's still a reticence. And that's really where at VMware, we're trying to make a difference. We've always been about openness and choice. We've always been about enabling people to have choice in what they do, starting with, choice in what computer you use by putting a hypervisor on top of it in terms of hardware. So now with the VMware Cloud Provider Program, which OVH is a member of, along with over 4,000 others, we've got a global network of public clouds that we can allow our users to move freely between, giving you that huge openness and choice. So what we're announcing this week at VMworld, when the embargo lifts, is this Sovereign Cloud Initiative. And the Sovereign Cloud Initiative is really about making sure our customers get access to VMware cloud provider partners that meet a sort of agreed framework that we've defined around cloud sovereignty. And so really, cloud providers have this unique advantage in delivering sovereign clouds. First, they have a better understanding. This one, I'm talking about nationally based cloud providers. You know, these 4,500 are based in particular countries. You know, take me to any country in the world and I'll give you a handful, if not tens of particular cloud providers to that country. And these have a unique advantage in delivering sovereign clouds. First, they have a better understanding of local, national, or regional security and compliance requirements, as well as government policy objectives and initiatives. Secondly, they can design and build tailored clouds for a specific jurisdiction, you know, ensuring all the relevant data and services remain under sovereign control. So many cloud providers only operate in one specific country or region. You know, OVH operate in many, but still provide these services. But third, as a sovereign legal entity in some cases, the cloud provider can help develop a national capability for digital resilience, for example, and mitigate dependency on foreign operators. So the new VMware Sovereign Cloud Initiative helps customers engage with trusted national cloud service providers to meet these requirements. These VMware Sovereign Cloud designated partners offer services built on VMware Cloud that align to VMware Sovereign Cloud Framework to meet these geo-specific requirements. And this could be around data sovereignty, jurisdictional control, data access and integrity, and all the things we've talked about already. And there's a long list of them, including OVH, UK Cloud, GDIT, AU Cloud in Australia, properly global, not just European here, Datacom, Ionos, Telefonica, Tieto Every, Swisscom, Telmex, ThinkOn, etc. So really, what we're trying to say here with our Sovereign Cloud Initiative is with VMware, we continue to give you openness and choice. And if you're concerned about going to the cloud, you're concerned about entering into the world of multi-cloud still, we're going to make sure we can work with our partners that we've been working with for years in the VMware Cloud Partner Program, VMware Cloud Provider Program, sorry, to make sure that you have trust that's been underlying this whole conversation, is that word trust, as you enter into that world. And so that's really what the whole VMware Cloud, Sovereign Cloud Initiative that we're announcing this week is about, making sure our customers know that we've worked with a number of partners to meet the needs of these sovereign cloud requirements and make sure that they can go into that with confidence.
And I think maybe looking to Pauline next, what would you say is the risk to businesses and this digital Europe that we're now in for the next sort of decade if we don't adopt digital and data sovereignty?
I mean, the risks for the business are, I see three. The first one is a loss of opportunities. If there are some countries where we can't operate, countries where we can't do business efficiently, then clearly the business cannot grow. There is another risk in terms of productivity, because if you cannot work efficiently because data are not accessible or not published or anything, then the business technically can do business in that country, but we just choose to not be there because it's just not productive enough. And the third risk, we have already talked about that, is really the reputation. And that's big, when you're a famous brand and you have a big trust with your customers and the communities, you really want to protect your reputation. So you want to make sure that the data are safely protected. So I would say those are the three big risks for the business if we can't operate in a trusted world.
And does anybody want to join in with that? Oh. You're all good with Pauline. Excellent. Thank you for summarising that. That's really, really nicely. Well, in about 5-10 minutes, we're going to go to our audience questions. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to share them in the Q&A box. And I thought it might be good to spend a little bit of time just talking about your sort of final overall thoughts when it comes to cloud and data sovereignty with a European perspective. Joe, do you want to start us off?
Well, I think just to underlie this whole message, as I just kind of did in the previous answer, this is all about trust. People have had, problems with trust going in the past. People have had trust issues going into the cloud. People have had their trust broken by cloud providers in the past, or maybe just the way they've engaged with them has not been the correct way to do it, and they've maybe made mistakes. I think what we're doing now is this is a proper sign of maturity in a cloud market. This is just moving on from the everyone goes and use, it's, imagine it this way, right? So when a new technology arrives, there's that pioneer in the new technology, and everyone rushes to go and adopt the technology from that new pioneer. As a market evolves, many more providers of that technology appear that provide nuanced, better, more evolved, diverse, more choice-laden versions of that product, and people find the version of that product they want to engage with. Cloud's very much got to that point right now. We've gone past there's 2 or 3 big cloud hyperscalers, we're going to rush to them, to, I want to engage with cloud on my terms. I want to engage with the cloud that I trust, and I want to get the benefits. And it's not just about, as Francesca was very rightly pointing out, cloud, not necessarily, everyone doesn't just go there for one reason. You don't go there because it's cheaper. You don't go there because it's faster. You go there because it provides whatever element it is for that application you need. And the other thing I'd like to sort of get across here as well is that when we're talking about data, it's really important, and Francesco talked to this earlier, we're talking about a sovereign cloud initiative today. But data in future isn't just in clouds, it's highly distributed. There's a lot we're talking about at VMworld this week about edge and what we're doing around edge initiatives. This GAIAX initiative also covers edge. It covers where data exists all the way from one side of a transaction to the other. So don't just think about the clouds. This is about where does data exist throughout my entire design chain, my entire architecture. So this is a far, far more complex thing than just let's have a few clouds that are highly secure that everyone can trust. It's about establishing new standards and new ways of talking about data. And I think it's really important that we start those conversations today. And I'm really happy to have the partners that we've got on this call and the customer with Michelin today as well, because it's great to see them. So thank you.
Excellent. And Sylvain, do you want to pick up on that next?
No, yeah, I think it's trust, very important, and also I'd like to insist on the fact, because obviously OVH Cloud carries a lot of values by design about those kind of freedom, because of the personal story of our founders, obviously. But what's important here is to also understand that it takes efforts, and obviously it's very complex for many companies that have developed with a way of making things simple, transparent for the customer, but actually it's not. It's more blurry in a way we don't control, and we end up in situations where we finally understand that, okay, it's not necessarily what we need, or maybe I made a mistake, or it's a risk. Like tech at the beginning is a fantastic promise. Anything is possible, right? Like it's amazing. And nowadays we are spending time on risk analysis more than opportunity in a way. So by getting back in control and making this effort, which is not only a question of providers changing the way they offer cloud services around this new deal with data, it's also about users making the effort, accepting that we have to change the way we consume technology in order to really get back in control. So it's not only a game of on this side of the fence of me being a provider or a service provider to give you answers. We do have an obligation here, and many actually have an obligation there, but it's also about user, the market, us as consumers, as citizens, to adopt another way of consuming the tech. And I wanted to also highlight this point because we spend a lot of time on the provider side of the fence, but I think it will even be fantastic if users themselves also are changing the way, like we do. I'm back with the food, like we do with sustainability, like we do with gender equality. This is something that comes also from everybody. We have to also change the way we consume things.
And maybe Pauline can take this from the other side, from the business side point of view. I'm just interested, for a business like Michelin, with the rise of multi-cloud and multiple sovereign clouds, is it just adding another layer of complexity to what you have to deal with, or are you happy to go down this route?
I would say the rules, the government rules, bring some complexity because you need to understand and comply with each framework. Therefore, you need to increase your footprint. That's how it translates. And yes, it's adding footprints. Usually it's adding tools to manage your data. It's also introducing diversity in the parameters. So yes, it's adding complexity, but I would say that's our job. And our job is to find solutions and to find tools to be able to manage that complexity to make it efficient for the business and the users. So yes, it's complexity, but it's life.
Such is life, exactly.
Such is life.
And maybe Francesco, just before we go into our Q&A session, what's your final thoughts on the topic of digital sovereignty?
Okay, I believe that first of all, we are talking about real economy. Let's talk about some numbers. 2025, direct digital economy will be 900 billions, which means 10% of the GDP. If you add on top of it the indirect economy, which is the value built on top of normal products, you can imagine a car, a fridge, whatever will be sold not for the price of construction, but for the price of value produced. And most of the value will be produced through data. Think about, electric cars as an example, or smart fridges. That means possibly we're going to reach 30–40% of the GDP. So first point is we are doing something for the future of our economy, not just for the geeks and the IT people. It's no more that story. It's a completely new story. Second, in order to do that, we need trust, yes. But the trust is some very complex concept that should not be confused between politics, jurisdictions, and other interpretation, because they will move. It's a moving target. So what we're trying to focus on is technical trust. So building something that can be trusted because inspectable. And instead of leaving your money under the bed, you can put them in a bank because you know it is regulated and it is traceable by all means. The last point is that, like Joe said at the beginning, and I think and Sylvain as well, we are not talking about cloud anymore. The future is going to be federations of nodes, people, providers, users sharing data. So we are building the fabric of this new future of digital platform computing in a very similar way like we built the internet. So think about the cloud of the future, and I think we should find a new name. It's no more cloud. It's going to be much more similar to the internet we have today. And if you remember the story of internet, we